In a world where every street corner is watching, some individuals still believe they can outsmart the silent, unblinking lenses that ultimately document their darkest moments. While platform guidelines naturally prevent us from broadcasting the most graphic raw footage of these downfalls, the undeniable facts and chilling reality recorded in those digital shadows speak entirely for themselves, beginning with a fugitive who managed to hide from the world for 2 decades before a fleeting camera car shattered his illusion. In the quiet, unassuming municipality of Galapagar, situated just north of Madrid, Spain, a seemingly ordinary man named Manuel had meticulously cultivated a peaceful life far removed from the violent history of his past. He integrated himself seamlessly into the local community, running a modest grocery store called El Huerto de Manu and working as a dedicated chef at a nearby restaurant, projecting the image of a hardworking, law-abiding citizen. However, beneath the flower, dusted apron, and the friendly demeanor lay the chilling reality of Gioacchino Gamino, one of Italy's most wanted and dangerous fugitives who had been successfully evading law enforcement for nearly 2 decades. Gamino was a prominent figure in the ruthless Stida mafia clan operating out of Agrigento, Sicily, a syndicate notorious for its brutal, bloody conflict with the dominant Cosa Nostra during the late 1980s and 1990s. His criminal portfolio included convictions for murder, drug trafficking, and mafia association, crimes that eventually led to his incarceration in Rome's high-security Rebibbia prison. In a plot that mirrored the cinematic narratives he exploited, Gamino orchestrated a daring escape in 2002 by slipping away during the chaotic filming of a movie taking place within the prison walls. From that moment onward, he completely severed all ties with his former life, cutting off communication with his family and associates in Italy to ensure his location remained an impenetrable secret. For 20 years, law enforcement agencies across Europe pursued a ghost, hunting a man who had seemingly evaporated into the ether by adopting a perfectly mundane disguise. Gamino's survival depended entirely on his unwavering discipline, avoiding any interaction with the criminal underworld that could potentially expose his true identity to the authorities relentlessly searching for him. He genuinely believed that the sheer passage of time and his absolute geographical displacement had permanently insulated him from the consequences of his violent reign in Sicily. Comfortably fading into the background of a sleepy Spanish suburb, he moved through his daily routine with the confidence of a man who had entirely beaten the system, completely unaware that the modern era of constant digital surveillance was about to violently breach his carefully constructed fortress. The impenetrable wall surrounding Gamino's 2-decade deception began to crumble not through a dramatic shootout or a treacherous informant, but rather as the result of a silent, automated digital sweep by a vehicle mapping the globe. Back in Rome, a specialized unit of the Italian anti-mafia police, the Direzione Investigativa Antimafia, had never officially closed the file on the escaped Stida boss, dedicating countless hours to chasing fading shadows across the European continent. Investigators had recently intercepted vague intelligence, suggesting that Gamino might have relocated to Spain, narrowing their vast search grid to the regions surrounding the capital city of Madrid. Lacking a specific physical address, detectives utilized the widely accessible, open-source technology of a popular digital mapping tool to visually sweep the streets of Galapagar, attempting to identify any anomalies or recognizable figures. As an investigator meticulously panned the digital camera along the Avenida de los Voluntarios, clicking through the panoramic street-level imagery, an entirely unremarkable scene suddenly arrested his attention. Frozen in time by a fleeting camera car that had passed through the town years prior, the pixelated image displayed 2 men standing on the sidewalk and engaged in a casual conversation outside a local grocery establishment. Although the faces were intentionally blurred by the platform's standard privacy algorithms, the physical build, posture, and subtle anatomical proportions of the older man leaning against the storefront struck a deep chord of familiarity within the investigative team. The digital snapshot placed the subject directly in front of the fruit and vegetable shop, aptly named El Huerto de Manu, providing the very first tangible geographical anchor the police had acquired in nearly 20 years. This seemingly innocuous digital artifact represented a monumental turning point, acting as the crucial catalyst that transformed a hopelessly cold case into an active, high-stakes international manhunt. The staggering irony of the situation immediately became apparent. A ruthless mafia boss who had successfully evaded the combined efforts of international law enforcement had been casually captured by an automated camera mounted on the roof of a passing civilian car. This singular, unblinking moment recorded on a public server served as the absolute point of no return, signaling the inevitable end of Gioacchino Gamino's long-held illusion of safety and absolute anonymity. With the digital breadcrumb established by the mapping vehicle, the investigative team rapidly intensified their efforts, shifting their focus from broad geographical sweeps to a concentrated, microscopic examination of the Spanish municipality. The detectives recognized that a pixelated, faceless image was entirely insufficient for an official arrest warrant, necessitating a meticulous process of corroboration to definitively link the man known as Manuel to the fugitive Sicilian boss. Their investigation logically extended to the immediate commercial vicinity, analyzing local business registries and online footprints connected to the name Manuel, which subsequently led them to a nearby dining establishment called La Cocina de Manu. Capitalizing on the extensive digital trails that even the most cautious individuals inadvertently leave in the modern era, the authorities initiated a deep dive into the restaurant's public social media presence. They soon discovered an active Facebook page dedicated to the eatery, heavily populated with promotional photographs showcasing the menu, the establishment's interior, and, most crucially, the culinary staff at work. As detectives methodically scrutinized the digital photo albums, they struck gold when they located a clear, high-resolution image of the restaurant's head chef, posing proudly in his traditional white uniform. The photograph finally provided an unblurred, direct view of the suspect's face, instantly sweeping away the agonizing ambiguity that had plagued the initial street-level discovery. Investigators meticulously compared the facial features of the Spanish chef with the aging, decades-old mugshots of Gioacchino Gamino preserved within the historical Italian criminal archives. The definitive, undeniable confirmation materialized when biometric analysts identified a very specific, deeply entrenched scar located on the left side of the chef's chin, perfectly matching a permanent physical anomaly documented in Gamino's old medical files. Every subsequent piece of digital intelligence collected over the following days seamlessly aligned, meticulously weaving a web of incontrovertible evidence around the unsuspecting fugitive as authorities carefully finalized their operational strategy. Law enforcement officers spent weeks silently monitoring his routines from the shadows, ensuring that no sudden movements would tip off the seasoned criminal before the international trap could be completely sprung. The climax of this decades-long evasion culminated not in a spectacular exchange of gunfire typical of cinematic mafia lore, but rather through a sudden, overwhelming exhibition of synchronized international law enforcement. On December 17, 2021, plainclothes officers from the Spanish National Police, working in direct coordination with the Italian anti-mafia unit, silently positioned themselves around the perimeter of Gamino's daily route in Galapagar. As the 61-year-old fugitive went about his seemingly mundane routine, entirely oblivious to the invisible net tightening around him, tactical teams swiftly moved in to execute the European arrest warrant. The arrest was executed with absolute clinical precision, neutralizing any potential threat or opportunity for a secondary escape before the former crime boss could even register the harsh reality of the situation. As the physical handcuffs locked securely around his wrists, completely shattering 20 years of carefully maintained deception, Gamino was plunged into a state of profound, unadulterated shock. He openly expressed deep bewilderment to the apprehending officers, genuinely unable to comprehend how they had managed to pierce the absolute silence he had maintained since his brazen prison break in Rome. The fugitive articulated that he had maintained a strict, self-imposed exile, entirely severing communication with his blood relatives and criminal associates for over a decade to prevent any intercepted phone calls or traced physical letters. The crushing realization that his downfall was not orchestrated by a human betrayal, but rather by the indifferent, sweeping gaze of a commercial technology company's camera car, fundamentally undermined his lifetime of calculated paranoia. He was utterly defeated by a silent observer he had never paid attention to, a technological advancement that had seamlessly mapped the modern world while he remained mentally anchored in the analog evasion tactics of the past. The very digital infrastructure that society relies upon for simple navigation had served as the ultimate, inescapable witness to dragging a violent phantom out of the shadows and back into the unforgiving illumination of justice. This momentary, accidental capture by an automated lens firmly established the incontrovertible truth that geographical distance and temporal separation are no longer sufficient shields against the pervasive reach of modern digital surveillance. Following his completely unexpected apprehension on the streets of Spain, Gioacchino Gamino was rapidly processed through the European judicial system to face the severe consequences he had dodged for 2 decades. He was officially extradited back to Italian soil, where the sprawling, high-security prison infrastructure immediately absorbed him to execute the life sentence previously handed down for his extensive history of mafia-related murders. The Galapagos community was left in a state of deep shock, struggling heavily to reconcile the friendly, unassuming chef they knew with the brutal reality of the international crime syndicate boss who had quietly lived among them. His arrest stands as a stark, undeniable testament to the persistence of modern investigative techniques and the terrifyingly efficient memory of the internet, which practically never forgets a face, regardless of the years that pass. Gamino's case permanently closed a highly significant chapter in the history of the Sicilian Stida clan, definitively proving that the digital panopticon has fundamentally rewritten the rules of evasion for even the most disciplined fugitives. The authorities utilized a digital tool explicitly designed for public convenience to achieve exactly what traditional detective work had failed to accomplish over 20 grueling years, highlighting a radical, permanent shift in forensic methodology. His lifetime behind bars now serves as a quiet, somber consequence of a single, unnoticed mistake, underscoring the reality that complete, untraceable anonymity is essentially an impossible illusion in the modern age. However, while some criminals are exposed by the broad, sweeping gaze of global mapping technologies acting entirely by chance, others are caught by cameras strategically installed to monitor our immediate, localized surroundings. The inescapable nature of surveillance extends far beyond international fugitives hiding in foreign countries, heavily impacting sudden, tragic crimes that unfold on the familiar, crowded streets of major urban centers. When the sun goes down and the city lights illuminate the nightlife, the cameras attached to nightclubs, apartment buildings, and dark alleys remain wide awake, silently recording the final, devastating moments of unsuspecting victims. This localized, unblinking vigilance brings us directly from a quiet Spanish suburb to the bustling, vibrant streets of Boston, where a young woman's birthday celebration tragically intersected with a predator who severely underestimated the digital eyes tracking his every move. In the vibrant, bustling heart of Boston, Massachusetts, 23-year-old Jassy Correa was navigating the beautiful, exhausting complexities of young adulthood and devoted motherhood. She was universally described by her close, knit family and extensive circle of friends as a radiant, deeply loving individual whose entire universe revolved around her 2-year-old daughter. Jassy worked tirelessly to provide a stable, nurturing environment for her child, balancing the demanding responsibilities of her daily life with the vibrant energy of a woman just stepping into her prime. As late February of 2019 approached, her loved ones eagerly organized a celebratory night out to honor her upcoming birthday, viewing it as a much-needed opportunity for her to relax and enjoy the city's nightlife. The evening of Saturday, February 23, began with joyous anticipation as Jassy dressed up and joined her closest companions for a festive gathering at the popular Venue nightclub, situated in the city's lively theater district. The atmosphere within the venue was filled with music, laughter, and the typical carefree celebrations of weekend revelers completely unaware of any looming danger. Photographs and social media posts from that night captured a smiling, vibrant Jassy surrounded by the people she cherished most, immortalizing a portrait of perfect normalcy and youthful exuberance. She spent the hours dancing and socializing, temporarily setting aside the heavy burdens of single motherhood to simply exist as a young woman celebrating another year of life. Her family rested easy at home, completely accustomed to the routine safety of a group outing in a heavily trafficked, well-lit urban center. There was absolutely no indication, no subtle warning sign, that this joyful birthday milestone would brutally transform into a devastating tragedy that would forever shatter her family and shock the entire New England region. The festive atmosphere of the birthday celebration rapidly dissolved into an agonizing nightmare when the nightclub closed its doors in the early hours of Sunday morning, abruptly setting the stage for an inexplicable disappearance. As the patrons flooded out onto the freezing Boston streets, Jassy became separated from her group of friends amidst the chaotic dispersal of crowds and a scramble to secure rideshares home. She was last seen by her companions standing on the sidewalk near the intersection of Tremont and Stewart Streets at approximately 12:15 a.m., trying to find her way back to the safety of her apartment. When dawn broke and the sun illuminated the city, Jassy's family awoke to the terrifying realization that her bed was empty and she had never returned to her toddler daughter. This absence was profoundly uncharacteristic for a mother who had never once abandoned her child or failed to maintain contact with her tight-knit support system. Frantic phone calls went straight to voicemail, text messages remained unread, and a creeping, icy dread began to consume her relatives as they frantically reached out to everyone who had attended the club. Within hours, the family bypassed standard waiting periods and desperately contacted the Boston Police Department, officially filing a missing persons report and pleading for immediate intervention. Law enforcement officers recognized the severe urgency of the situation, immediately categorizing her disappearance as highly suspicious given her pristine record of maternal responsibility and the sudden cessation of her digital footprint. The local community swiftly mobilized, printing hundreds of missing person flyers, displaying Jassy's vibrant face, and distributing them across the city's transit hubs and neighborhood bulletin boards. The agonizing clock had started ticking, marking the definitive point of no return where a celebratory milestone was officially reclassified as a desperate, high-stakes race against time to find a vulnerable young mother. Detectives immediately launched a massive, coordinated effort to retrace Jassy's final known steps, transforming the theater district into a sprawling grid of investigative scrutiny. They systematically canvassed the area, knocking on the doors of neighboring businesses, interviewing bouncers, and legally requisitioning hundreds of hours of scattered surveillance footage from local storefronts and municipal traffic cameras. The initial review of the fragmented video data presented a confusing, disjointed timeline, requiring technological analysts to painstakingly stitch together blurry, low-light clips to track her movements after she separated from her friends. Their persistent digital archaeology eventually paid off when a high-definition street camera captured a crucial, chilling interaction occurring shortly after midnight. The footage clearly depicted Jassy engaging in a conversation with an unknown male individual outside the nightclub, leading to her entering a distinct red sedan that smoothly drove away into the freezing night. Investigators heavily prioritized identifying this vehicle, utilizing automated license plate readers and traffic intersection cameras to track the red car's trajectory as it departed the downtown Boston area. The digital breadcrumbs inevitably led them to a vehicle registered to Louise Coleman, a 32-year-old Rhode Island resident with no prior criminal record, who had been visiting the city that evening. Law enforcement swiftly pivoted their focus across state lines to Providence, Rhode Island, obtaining search warrants for Coleman's residence and desperately hoping to locate Jassy alive within his apartment. However, as Providence police surrounded his building and prepared to make contact, they discovered that Coleman had already fled the premises, abandoning his apartment and actively evading the rapidly closing dragnet. The sudden disappearance of their primary suspect exponentially elevated the tension of the case, forcing investigators to rely even more heavily on the silent digital witnesses mounted on the walls of Coleman's own apartment complex. The absolute peak of the investigation's horror was unveiled when detectives finally gained access to the comprehensive, multi-angle security system installed throughout Lewis Coleman's Providence apartment building. Investigators sat in a darkened room, gripping the edges of their seats as they reviewed the high-definition recordings from the early morning hours following Jassie's disappearance. The silent, unblinking lenses captured a deeply disturbing sequence of events, beginning with Coleman's red sedan pulling into the parking garage just hours after leaving the Boston Theater District. The camera positioned at the building's entrance clearly recorded Coleman exiting the vehicle and proceeding to physically drag a limp, motionless body, unmistakably wearing the exact clothing Jassie had worn for her birthday, through the lobby doors. He callously hoisted her over his shoulder, struggling with her dead weight as he casually maneuvered her through the brightly lit, completely deserted hallways toward his private unit. The brutal visual evidence completely shattered any lingering, fragile hope that the young mother might be found alive, transforming a missing persons search into an active, undeniable homicide investigation. The horror escalated further as investigators fast-forwarded the surveillance timeline to several days later, where the cameras documented Coleman returning to the hallway with a large, heavy-looking piece of luggage. The footage painstakingly detailed his visible physical exertion as he hauled the oversized, dark suitcase out of his apartment, dragged it into the elevator, and finally forced it into the trunk of his red sedan. He had completely failed to account for the comprehensive nature of his building's security infrastructure, leaving behind an undeniable, high-resolution visual confession of His Highness' actions. This monumental digital discovery provided the authorities with the exact evidence required to issue federal arrest warrants and instantly elevate the regional search into a nationwide, desperate manhunt for a fleeing killer. Armed with the indisputable, horrifying video evidence from the Providence apartment building, federal and local authorities immediately broadcasted the details of Coleman's red sedan to law enforcement agencies across the eastern seaboard. The intense, interstate manhunt reached its grim conclusion merely days later when Delaware State Police successfully intercepted his vehicle driving southbound on Interstate 95, pulling him over in a highly coordinated tactical stop. A subsequent, deeply tragic search of the car's trunk revealed the very same oversized suitcase captured on the surveillance footage, containing the devastatingly brutalized remains of Jassie Correa. Lewis Coleman III was immediately taken into federal custody, eventually facing trial where the inescapable security footage served as the prosecution's most damning, unassailable centerpiece, entirely dismantling any potential defense strategy. The jury swiftly found him guilty of federal kidnapping resulting in death, leading the judge to sentence him to life in prison without the absolute possibility of parole, permanently removing him from society. The profound tragedy of Jassie's death sent shockwaves through the Boston community, leaving a grieving family to raise a young daughter who was violently robbed of her mother by a senseless act of predatory violence. Her case stands as a permanent, harrowing reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of urban nightlife and the critical, undeniable importance of security cameras in securing justice for those who can no longer speak. Coleman's monumental hubris blinded him to the ubiquitous presence of modern surveillance, foolishly believing he could carry out a brutal crime in a heavily monitored residential building without leaving a digital trace. Yet, this deadly underestimation of domestic security infrastructure is not an isolated phenomenon confined to apartment hallways or urban cityscapes. Just as this killer failed to check for the silent observers documenting his every move in Rhode Island, another deeply disturbing tragedy would soon unfold inside a seemingly peaceful suburban home in Colorado, where a residential neighborhood camera would ultimately unravel a web of deceit spun by a trusted family member. In the quiet, meticulously manicured suburban enclave of Lorson Ranch in Colorado Springs, the Stotch family projected the image of a perfectly functional, blended household managing the routine demands of modern life. Albert Stotch, an active duty member of the National Guard, frequently traveled for his military obligations, leaving his wife, Letitia Stotch, to manage the daily household operations and care for his children. The primary focus of the home was 11-year-old Gannon Stotch, a bright, deeply loved boy known throughout his community for his infectious energy, sweet disposition, and passion for video games. Letitia had stepped into the role of primary caregiver during Albert's deployments, assuming a position of immense responsibility that inherently required absolute trust and dedication to the children's well-being. Gannon maintained a very strong, loving relationship with his biological mother, Landon Hyatt, who lived out of state but remained deeply involved in his upbringing through frequent communication and visits. The neighborhood itself was characterized by modern homes, winding streets, and the comforting, mundane routine of suburban existence, where families felt secure letting their children navigate the sidewalks freely. Residents enjoyed a high level of perceived safety, bolstered by the subtle but ubiquitous presence of residential security systems and doorbell cameras, primarily installed to monitor package deliveries and deter minor property crimes. There was absolutely no outward indication of the deep-seated resentment and psychological volatility quietly brewing beneath the surface of Letitia's carefully maintained public facade as a devoted stepmother. To the casual observer, the Stotch residence was completely indistinguishable from the dozens of identical houses surrounding it, operating with the same quiet rhythm that defined the rest of the Colorado community. This comforting illusion of domestic normalcy would violently fracture, transforming a peaceful family home into the epicenter of one of the most heartbreaking and heavily scrutinized criminal investigations in the state's history. The devastating rupture of this suburban peace occurred on the bleak, freezing afternoon of January 27, 2020, when Letitia Stotch officially contacted the El Paso County Sheriff's Office to report her stepson missing. According to her initial, seemingly frantic narrative, Gannon had left their home between 3:15 and 4:00 p.m. to walk to a nearby friend's house and simply never returned before the sun went down. This sudden, inexplicable vanishing of an 11-year-old child immediately triggered a massive, urgent response from local law enforcement, who categorized the situation as a high-priority missing persons case due to plummeting winter temperatures. Albert Stotch received the terrifying phone call while deployed out of state, prompting him to secure an emergency flight back to Colorado to join the desperate search for his son. The local community instantaneously mobilized, organizing large-scale volunteer search parties that scoured the surrounding fields, parks, and drainage ditches equipped with flashlights and heavy winter gear. Hundreds of missing child flyers displaying Gannon's smiling face were hastily printed and distributed across neighborhood bulletin boards, storefronts, and social media platforms in a frantic bid to generate any actionable leads. Law enforcement agencies deployed tracking dogs, drones, and specialized search and rescue teams, meticulously combing through the vast, rugged terrain bordering the Lorson Ranch subdivision. As the critical first 48 hours ticked by without a single confirmed sighting or tangible clue regarding the boy's whereabouts, a profound, chilling sense of dread began to settle over the entire region. The complete absence of physical evidence along his supposed walking route directly contradicted Letitia's initial statement, raising immediate, silent suspicions among seasoned detectives accustomed to analyzing domestic disappearances. This initial police report marked the definitive point of no return, locking the stepmother into a fabricated timeline that would soon be subjected to the unforgiving, microscopic scrutiny of a massive criminal investigation. As the search entered its second agonizing week, the investigative focus subtly shifted inward, heavily scrutinizing the bizarre, increasingly erratic behavior exhibited by Letitia Stotch in the wake of her stepson's disappearance. Detectives conducting multiple interviews with Letitia noted her extreme defensive posture, contradictory statements regarding her exact movements on the day Gannon vanished, and her strange lack of genuine emotional distress. She voluntarily engaged in a highly unusual, rambling interview with a local television news station. where she deliberately hid her face from the camera and spent the majority of the airtime angrily complaining about being unfairly suspected, rather than pleading for Gannon's safe return. Behind closed doors, she constantly altered her narrative to law enforcement, pivoting from the runaway story to wild, unsubstantiated claims that an unknown assailant had broken into their home, assaulted her, and abducted the child. Investigators executing a search warrant on the Stotch residence discovered deeply troubling physical anomalies, including significant blood evidence in Gannon's bedroom that had been hastily and incompletely cleaned up. Albert Stotch, working in direct cooperation with the FBI and local police, began covertly recording his telephone conversations with his wife, capturing her desperate, convoluted attempts to explain away the mounting physical evidence. She continuously generated a chaotic smokescreen of misinformation, inventing elaborate stories about polygraph tests, fake rental cars, and mysterious individuals to deliberately stall the momentum of the investigative team. The biological mother, Landon, arrived in Colorado and issued heart-wrenching public pleas for her son, creating a stark, devastating contrast to the stepmother's cold, calculated media manipulation. Detectives meticulously pulled cell phone data, digital GPS tracking, and financial records, slowly mapping out a hidden timeline that starkly contradicted every single variation of Letitia's official statements. The entire investigation was functioning on the premise of a domestic homicide disguised as a disappearance, but authorities desperately needed an unassailable piece of objective evidence to completely shatter her web of lies and secure an arrest. The absolute peak of the investigation's tension arrived not from a dramatic police interrogation or a forensic laboratory, but from a seemingly innocuous piece of hardware mounted on a neighbor's residential property. A vigilant neighbor living directly across the street from the Stotch residence proactively reviewed his own private home security system. Carefully scanning the digital footage from the morning of January 27, he immediately recognized the immense significance of what the unblinking lens had captured. Turning the high-definition digital files over to the lead detectives working the desperate missing child case, investigators watched in grim silence as the wide-angle camera clearly recorded Letitia Stotch's distinctive red pickup truck parked in her driveway at precisely 3 a.m. on the day Gannon supposedly vanished. The footage indisputably showed the young boy, visibly moving slowly, walking out of his front door and getting into the passenger side of his stepmother's vehicle before she backed out and drove away. This singular visual fact instantly annihilated her initial report to the police, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that Gannon had not walked to a friend's house in the afternoon. The true, horrifying gravity of the digital evidence was revealed several hours later on the recording, when the same camera captured the red truck returning to the residential driveway at 2:19 p.m. The unblinking security lens meticulously documented Letitia Stotch exiting the driver's side of the vehicle and entering the home entirely alone, with absolutely no sign of Gannon returning with her. She had completely failed to account for the overlapping fields of vision created by modern suburban security networks, leaving behind an undeniable, time-stamped visual confession of her deception. This monumental digital discovery provided law enforcement with the exact, irrefutable proof required to systematically dismantle her alibi, officially confirming that she was the last person to ever see the child alive. Armed with the devastating clarity of the neighbor's surveillance footage, authorities immediately secured a warrant and arrested Letitia Stotch in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, forcefully terminating her desperate attempts to flee the jurisdiction. The grim, heartbreaking conclusion to the physical search materialized 2 months later when a bridge inspector in Pace, Florida, discovered a suitcase containing Gannon's brutally discarded remains beneath an overpass. Forensic analysis tragically confirmed the horrific extent of the violence he suffered in his own bedroom, solidly corroborating the blood evidence found in the home and the timeline established by the street camera. During the subsequent, highly publicized trial, the prosecution heavily utilized the timestamped neighbor's security video as the absolute cornerstone of their case, methodically destroying the defense's fabricated narratives. The jury was presented with the undeniable reality that the stepmother had meticulously orchestrated a brutal murder and a complex, multi-state cover-up, entirely undone by a standard residential security lens she had ignored. Letitia Stauch was swiftly found guilty of first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and tampering with a deceased human body, ensuring she would never again walk as a free woman. The judge handed down a maximum sentence of life in prison without the absolute possibility of parole, delivering a measure of strict judicial accountability to a deeply grieving, permanently shattered family. Gannon's tragic fate stands as a harrowing testament to the unimaginable betrayals that can occur behind the closed doors of seemingly perfect suburban homes, hidden just out of sight. The inescapable digital gaze of the neighborhood camera served as the ultimate, silent witness for a vulnerable child who had been violently silenced by the very person entrusted with his care. However, the deadly hubris of ignoring surveillance infrastructure is not merely confined to quiet residential streets, as this lethal oversight also heavily impacted a massive, bustling university campus where an international scholar crossed paths with an arrogant predator. In the sprawling, academically rigorous environment of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, thousands of international students arrive each year seeking advanced education and a pathway to a better future. Among these ambitious scholars was Yingying Zhang, a brilliant 26-year-old researcher who had traveled thousands of miles from her working-class family in Nanping, China, to conduct vital studies in agricultural sciences. Yingying was universally regarded by her professors and peers as a deeply dedicated, exceptionally intelligent young woman whose primary goal was to eventually become a university professor to financially support her parents back home. She had only been in the United States for a few weeks by the late spring of 2017, spending her days completely immersed in the laboratory and her evenings navigating the peaceful, tree-lined streets of the Midwestern college town. The university campus projected a profound aura of security, featuring extensive public transportation systems, well-lit pedestrian pathways, and a bustling community of academics that naturally fostered a strong sense of safety among the visiting international population. Yingying was embracing this new chapter of her life with tremendous optimism, carefully managing her meager stipend to ensure she could afford basic necessities while sending whatever remaining funds she could back to her family. Her daily routine was characterized by a quiet, methodical discipline, entirely focused on her environmental research and devoid of any risky behaviors or associations that might place her in a vulnerable position. To her family across the globe, the American university represented the absolute pinnacle of academic achievement and a secure harbor where their daughter could safely cultivate her immense intellectual potential without fear of harm. There was absolutely no reason to suspect that this prestigious institution, monitored by an extensive network of municipal and campus security systems, would become the hunting ground for a deeply disturbed predator hiding in plain sight. This serene academic setting was about to be irreversibly shattered, transforming a promising scholar's dream into a devastating international nightmare that would expose the hidden dangers lurking within seemingly safe academic spaces. The tragic unraveling of Yingying's promising future began on the bright, ordinary afternoon of June 9, 2017, when she set out to accomplish a completely mundane administrative task. She had scheduled an appointment to sign a lease for a new, slightly more affordable apartment off campus, stepping out of her laboratory and heading toward the local transit stops to catch her usual bus route. Running a few minutes behind schedule, Yingying managed to send a polite text message to the property manager at 1:39 p.m., apologizing for the slight delay and confirming that she was en route to the leasing office. Surveillance cameras mounted on city buses briefly captured her running down the sidewalk, desperately attempting to flag down a departing bus, only to watch it pull away, leaving her stranded on the corner of North Goodwin Avenue. As she stood waiting in the warm afternoon sun for the next transit vehicle, the timeline of her meticulously planned life abruptly and permanently stopped, marking the exact moment she vanished from the face of the earth. When Yingying failed to arrive at the leasing office, and subsequently did not return to her laboratory or her apartment by nightfall. Her colleagues immediately recognized the severe, uncharacteristic nature of her absence. Frantic attempts to reach her cell phone went straight to voicemail, prompting her deeply concerned professors and friends to contact the university police department to officially report the visiting scholar missing. Recognizing the immense vulnerability of an international student with limited local connections, the local authorities rapidly escalated the situation, bringing in the Federal Bureau of Investigation to assist with the terrifyingly inexplicable disappearance. The immediate mobilization of law enforcement generated a massive, urgent wave of community action, with students organizing search parties and distributing thousands of flyers across the county, while her family in China received the devastating news. This agonizing silence initiated a desperate, high-stakes digital excavation, as investigators realized that discovering her fate relied entirely on uncovering whatever visual evidence the campus infrastructure had silently recorded on that fateful afternoon. Faced with a complete absence of physical evidence at the bus stop, federal and local investigators immediately pivoted their focus to the extensive grid of surveillance cameras heavily monitoring the university's perimeter and surrounding intersections. A dedicated team of analysts painstakingly reviewed hundreds of hours of mundane traffic footage, scanning the digital archives for any sign of the young scholar standing on North Goodwin Avenue at the precise time her communications ceased. Their exhausting visual search eventually yielded a chilling breakthrough when a high-definition municipal camera captured Yingying standing near the curb, waiting patiently for public transportation in the broad daylight. The unblinking lens meticulously documented a dark, colored vehicle slowly pulling up beside her, lingering for a brief conversation before Yingying stepped into the passenger side, completely unaware that she was entering a fatal trap. Investigators immediately identified the suspect vehicle as a black Saturn Astra, a relatively uncommon model, and initiated a sweeping analysis of state motor vehicle registries to locate every single matching car registered in the surrounding county. This digital dragnet quickly narrowed down the suspect pool to a handful of individuals, ultimately leading detectives to the doorstep of Brent Christensen, a 27-year-old former doctoral student in the university's physics department. When federal agents first arrived at his apartment to question him regarding his whereabouts on the afternoon of the disappearance, Christensen remained eerily calm, projecting the polished, intellectual demeanor of an innocent academic. He confidently provided a completely fabricated alibi, assuring investigators that he had spent the entirety of that specific Friday inside his apartment, either sleeping or playing video games, fundamentally denying any interaction with the missing scholar. He believed that his composed performance and his status as a respected academic peer would effortlessly deflect police suspicion, grossly underestimating the technological capabilities of the surveillance network that had already documented his predatory movements. The absolute climax of this devastating investigation occurred when the sheer arrogance of the killer collided violently with the undeniable, overlapping network of hidden cameras and covert recording devices he had completely failed to consider. Forensic image analysts at the FBI managed to digitally enhance the specific municipal surveillance footage that captured the abduction, revealing a highly distinct, undeniable detail on the black Saturn Astra that picked up the victim. The enhanced video clearly displayed a heavily cracked front passenger side hubcap and a specific factory sunroof, physical anomalies that matched Christensen's vehicle sitting in his driveway with absolute, devastating precision. Recognizing they had their perpetrator, but desperately needing to locate the victim's remains, the FBI orchestrated a high-stakes tactical maneuver by convincing Christensen's girlfriend to secretly wear a hidden wiretap to capture a confession. The horrifying peak of Christensen's hubris was fully exposed during a deeply emotional, crowded campus vigil organized to support Yingying's devastated family. An event the killer arrogantly attended to revel in the suffering he had manufactured. As he stood amidst hundreds of grieving students and community members, completely oblivious to the hidden microphone pinned to his girlfriend's clothing, he leaned in and chillingly boasted about being the one responsible for the tragedy. He graphically, proudly detailed the immense violence he had inflicted upon the young scholar inside his apartment, aggressively comparing his own manufactured body count to notorious historical serial killers while mocking the victim's fierce attempts to survive. He had meticulously checked his physical surroundings for witnesses, but entirely failed to comprehend that the modern era allows investigators to plant hidden recording technology directly into the most intimate, seemingly secure conversations. This monumental oversight provided federal prosecutors with the most damning, inescapable audio confession imaginable, permanently destroying his carefully constructed academic facade and securing the incontrovertible proof required to authorize an immediate arrest. Armed with the horrifying wiretap audio and the unassailable video evidence of the cracked hubcap, federal agents swiftly moved in and apprehended Brent Christensen, permanently removing the arrogant predator from the university community. During his highly publicized federal trial, the prosecution heavily utilized both the municipal camera footage and the covert audio recordings to systematically dismantle any possibility of a defense, exposing the absolute depths of his depravity. The jury was presented with a chilling portrait of a killer who believed his elevated intellect made him invisible, only to be completely undone by a broken piece of plastic caught on camera and a hidden microphone. Christensen was definitively convicted of federal kidnapping resulting in death, and although he narrowly escaped execution, the judge handed down a mandatory sentence of life in federal prison without the absolute possibility of parole. Despite the legal finality of his conviction, the devastating reality remains that Christensen ruthlessly refused to disclose the exact location of Yingying Zhang's remains, denying her heartbroken family the closure of bringing their daughter home to China. Her profound tragedy stands as a grim, permanent reminder of the immense vulnerabilities that exist even within the most structured academic environments, and the crucial role that digital surveillance plays in tracking predators who utilize intellectual credentials as camouflage. Christensen's fatal underestimation of electronic observation directly mirrors the hubris of other killers who embed themselves within close, knit communities, foolishly believing their proximity to the investigation will somehow shield them from technological scrutiny. This chilling phenomenon of a highly educated perpetrator feigning concern for their victim while living right next door is not a solitary occurrence, as this identical brand of arrogance would soon unfold in the shadow of a prestigious law school in Georgia. In the intellectually demanding, highly competitive environment of the Mercer University College of Law in Macon, Georgia, the pressure to succeed fundamentally shapes the daily lives of its aspiring attorneys. Among the dedicated student body was Lauren Giddings, an incredibly bright, popular, and deeply compassionate 27-year-old from Maryland who had just achieved her long-sought goal of graduating from the prestigious institution. She was actively studying for the bar exam and preparing to launch a promising career as a public defender, driven by a profound, genuine desire to provide legal advocacy for society's most vulnerable and marginalized individuals. Lauren resided in the Barristers Hall apartment complex, a residential building situated directly across the street from the law school that was specifically designed to house the university's graduate students in a quiet, focused environment. Her immediate neighbor in the complex was Stephen McDaniel, a fellow law student who was universally perceived by his peers as highly eccentric, socially awkward, and deeply isolated from the vibrant social circles that Lauren effortlessly navigated. While Lauren radiated warmth and maintained strong, loving relationships with a wide network of friends and family, McDaniel existed entirely on the periphery, projecting a quiet, intensely intense demeanor that many found unsettling, but ultimately harmless within the context of academic stress. The proximity of their apartments naturally resulted in occasional, polite interactions, but there was absolutely no indication that beneath McDaniel's awkward exterior lay a deeply disturbed, violent obsession with the young woman living just on the other side of his wall. The campus community operated under a profound illusion of safety, Assuming that a residential complex populated entirely by future lawyers and heavily insulated from the surrounding city would be the absolute last place a brutal predator would dare to strike. This seemingly secure academic bubble was about to be irreversibly shattered, transforming the quiet apartment building into a horrific crime scene and exposing the terrifying reality that intellectual credentials offer absolutely no protection against predatory violence. The peaceful aftermath of the law school graduation abruptly transformed into an agonizing nightmare in late June of 2011, when Lauren Giddings simply vanished from her apartment without leaving a single trace or explanation. She completely ceased communication with her family and friends, failing to respond to text messages or phone calls, and missing several scheduled appointments, an absence that was profoundly uncharacteristic for the highly responsible and communicative young professional. Her sudden silence immediately triggered severe alarm among her tight-knit social circle, prompting her friends to physically visit her apartment at Barristers Hall, where they discovered her vehicle still parked outside and her personal belongings untouched inside the unit. The immediate realization that something was terribly wrong led them to contact the Macon Police Department, officially reporting Lauren missing and initiating a desperate, high-stakes search operation that rapidly consumed the entire university community. As law enforcement officers swarmed the apartment complex, establishing a perimeter and systematically interviewing residents, Stephen McDaniel inserted himself directly into the center of the chaotic scene, actively engaging with the victim's friends and the investigating detectives. He portrayed himself as a deeply concerned, helpful neighbor, openly participating in the physical search of the surrounding grounds and willingly offering any assistance he could provide to locate the missing woman. His outward behavior was perfectly calibrated to project innocent cooperation, successfully masking the dark, calculated reality that he was already intimately aware of her tragic fate and was actively monitoring the progress of the police investigation from the inside. This initial, highly visible participation in the search effort marked a critical juncture, locking McDaniel into a manufactured public narrative of concern that would soon be subjected to the microscopic, unforgiving scrutiny of seasoned homicide detectives. As the physical search yielded no immediate results, the investigative focus subtly shifted toward establishing a comprehensive psychological and behavioral profile of the residents at Barristers Hall, inevitably drawing detectives' attention back to the eccentric neighbor. McDaniel famously granted a highly unusual, rambling interview to a local television news crew standing directly outside the apartment complex, where his bizarre, visibly disconnected demeanor and sudden, exaggerated emotional reactions immediately raised red flags among law enforcement. Behind the scenes, detectives quietly obtained search warrants for his apartment and electronic devices, unearthing a deeply disturbing, hidden reality that starkly contradicted his public image as a harmless, socially awkward law student. The forensic analysis of his computer hard drive revealed a horrifying digital footprint, including extensive, meticulous internet searches regarding methods of committing the perfect murder, the decomposition of human remains, and deeply troubling, violent pornography. Furthermore, investigators discovered that McDaniel had secretly acquired a master key to the apartment building, granting him unrestricted, undetected access to Lauren's unit, entirely bypassing the building's standard security measures. The physical search of his residence also yielded packaging for a specific brand of hacksaw, a detail that resonated with chilling significance as detectives desperately searched the premises for any sign of the missing woman. While he continued to confidently maintain his innocence, arrogantly believing that his legal education would allow him to outsmart the local police department, the investigative team meticulously built a circumstantial case entirely founded on his dark, obsessive digital trail. The authorities recognized they were dealing with a highly intelligent, methodical suspect who believed he had committed an undetectable crime, necessitating a piece of undeniable, objective visual evidence to completely shatter his elaborate facade and secure an arrest. The absolute climax of the investigation arrived when detectives successfully secured and analyzed the external security footage, recorded by the comprehensive surveillance system monitoring the perimeter of the Barristers Hall apartment complex. Investigators spent agonizing hours carefully scanning the digital archives for the specific time frame immediately following Lauren's disappearance, desperately searching for any visual anomaly that might explain how a woman could vanish from a locked residential building. Their exhaustive visual review finally yielded a terrifying, undeniably clear sequence of events that captured Stephen McDaniel, operating under the cover of darkness, completely destroying his carefully constructed alibi and his facade of neighborly concern. The unblinking security camera meticulously documented McDaniel emerging from the apartment building in the dead of night, struggling visibly under the immense weight of a large, heavy object that he forcefully maneuvered toward the complex's industrial dumpsters. This chilling footage perfectly correlated with the horrific discovery made by sanitation workers shortly thereafter, as the heavy object McDaniel was recorded moving was subsequently tragically confirmed to be the meticulously wrapped, dismembered torso of Lauren Giddings. He had entirely failed to account for the overlapping fields of vision created by the external security cameras, leaving behind an incontrovertible, time-stamped visual confession of his brutal actions while simultaneously participating in the public search. This monumental digital discovery provided law enforcement with the exact, irrefutable proof required to systematically dismantle his narrative, instantly transitioning the case from a missing persons inquiry into a capital murder investigation with McDaniel squarely in the center. The sheer arrogance that led him to believe he could commit a murder, dismember a body, and dispose of the evidence within the visual range of a security camera ultimately became the singular catalyst for his permanent downfall. Armed with the devastating clarity of the apartment complex's surveillance footage, authorities immediately arrested Stephen McDaniel, forcefully terminating his twisted game of intellectual superiority and bringing an end to the agonizing uncertainty surrounding Lauren's fate. Faced with the overwhelming, inescapable visual evidence of his guilt and the very real prospect of a death penalty conviction, McDaniel's carefully maintained facade completely collapsed, leading his defense team to negotiate a plea agreement. In a chilling courtroom appearance, he officially pleaded guilty to the murder of Lauren Giddings, publicly providing a horrifying, clinical account of how he utilized his stolen master key to enter her apartment and violently end her life. The judge accepted the plea and handed down a sentence of life in prison, permanently removing the highly educated predator from society and ensuring he would spend his remaining decades entirely confined behind bars. The profound tragedy of Lauren's death sent permanent shockwaves through the legal community, serving as a devastating reminder that even the most prestigious academic environments are not immune to the horrors of targeted, obsessive violence. McDaniel's catastrophic underestimation of the building's external security infrastructure stands as a permanent testament to the hubris of criminals who believe their intellect makes them invisible to the unblinking gaze of digital lenses. The inescapable reality is that cameras do not care about academic credentials or carefully constructed public personas. They simply record the unvarnished truth, exposing predators who mistakenly believe they operate in the shadows. This exact phenomenon of a killer blatantly ignoring a heavily surveilled environment is not limited to isolated apartment complexes, as a similarly devastating oversight would soon unfold in broad daylight in the sunny suburbs of Florida. In the sun-drenched, seemingly idyllic suburban community of Sarasota, Florida, the illusion of absolute daytime safety was woven into the very fabric of daily existence for its residents. 11-year-old Carly Brucia was a vibrant, deeply loved middle school student who embodied the innocent, carefree spirit of a child growing up in a close, knit neighborhood where kids frequently navigated the streets entirely on their own. On the pleasantly warm afternoon of February 1, 2004, Carly was simply enjoying a standard Sunday routine, spending hours at a close friend's house participating in sleepover activities and watching television before beginning her journey back to her own home. Her intended route was a completely familiar, heavily trafficked pathway along busy public roads, a walk she had undertaken numerous times without ever encountering a single threat to her physical well-being. The community operated under the comforting, unspoken assumption that a child walking in broad daylight, surrounded by passing cars and operational businesses, was fundamentally protected by the sheer visibility of her surroundings. Sarasota projected the quintessential image of suburban security, featuring manicured lawns, bustling shopping plazas, and an active police presence that naturally fostered a profound sense of communal trust among parents and children alike. Carly's parents expected her to walk through the front door at a designated time, fully trusting the established routine and the perceived invulnerability of a bright Florida afternoon. There was absolutely no outward indication that this entirely mundane walk home would violently shatter the peace of their community, transforming a familiar stretch of pavement into the site of a horrifying abduction. The sunny disposition of the neighborhood provided a deceptive camouflage for a predator who was silently calculating his moment to strike amidst the bustling flow of weekend traffic. This comforting illusion of daylight security was about to be permanently destroyed, exposing the terrifying reality that immense danger can operate brazenly out in the open, completely hidden in plain sight. The tranquil atmosphere of that Sunday afternoon abruptly dissolved into an agonizing, escalating nightmare when the designated time for Carly's arrival completely passed without any sign of the young girl. Her parents initially experienced the standard, mild concern of a delayed child, making routine phone calls to her friend's residence, only to receive the chilling confirmation that Carly had departed exactly on schedule. As the minutes agonizingly stretched into hours and the sun began to lower on the horizon, a profound, icy dread rapidly consumed her family, officially shattering the remnants of their suburban complacency. Frantic physical searches of the immediate neighborhood yielded absolutely no trace of the 11-year-old, prompting her deeply terrified parents to contact the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office to officially report her missing. Law enforcement officers immediately recognized the severe, highly suspicious nature of her disappearance, instantaneously escalating the situation to a high-priority, full-scale search and rescue operation as twilight descended upon the city. The sudden vanishing of a child from a busy public thoroughfare in broad daylight immediately triggered a massive mobilization of community resources, with hundreds of volunteers grabbing flashlights to scour surrounding woods, drainage ditches, and empty lots. Missing child posters featuring Carly's smiling face were hastily printed and aggressively distributed across local storefronts, gas stations, and busy intersections in a desperate bid to generate any actionable leads from the public. Bloodhounds were deployed to retrace her exact steps from her friend's front door, methodically tracking her scent along the concrete sidewalks until the trail inexplicably vanished into thin air, strongly suggesting she had been placed into a vehicle. This terrifying realization marked the definitive point of no return, locking the entire community into a desperate, high-stakes race against time as investigators scrambled to comprehend how a child could be successfully abducted without a single eyewitness coming forward. The agonizing silence surrounding her disappearance forced detectives to pivot their strategy, relying entirely on the silent, digital infrastructure that quietly monitored the commercial businesses lining her intended route home. Faced with a complete absence of physical evidence and a terrifying lack of human witnesses, the investigative team meticulously shifted their focus to the extensive grid of surveillance cameras attached to the commercial properties along Carly's path. Detectives systematically canvassed every single business, gas station, and retail outlet located on Bee Ridge Road and its surrounding intersections, legally requisitioning hundreds of hours of mundane, low-resolution security footage. They established a massive digital command center where analysts painstakingly reviewed the recordings frame by frame, desperately searching the blurred backgrounds for a glimpse of the young girl's distinctive clothing or any suspicious vehicular activity. The exhausting visual search required immense patience and focus as investigators manually tracked the timeline of her presumed walk, attempting to stitch together a coherent narrative from the disjointed, silent perspectives of automated lenses. Law enforcement faced an incredibly daunting task, knowing that the structural integrity of their entire investigation relied completely on the slight chance that a privately owned camera had accidentally documented the exact moment of the abduction. Their persistent, methodical digital archaeology eventually narrowed their focus to the Avart's car wash, an entirely ordinary, automated cleaning facility situated directly along the precise trajectory Carly would have taken to reach her house. The detectives secured the hard drives containing the car wash's comprehensive security data, praying that the multiple cameras strategically angled to monitor the property for vandalism might have inadvertently captured the sidewalk bordering the lot. As they loaded the proprietary video files into their system and navigated to the specific time frame of late Sunday afternoon, the suffocating tension within the police department reached an absolute breaking point. They were fully aware that this specific reel of tape represented their final, best hope of understanding the mechanics of the crime, unaware that they were about to witness one of the most chilling, consequential pieces of surveillance footage in modern true crime history. The unblinking eye of the commercial security system was preparing to reveal a horrifying, undeniable truth that would instantaneously transform a local missing persons case into a massive, nationwide manhunt. The absolute peak of the investigation's horror was unveiled when detectives finally decoded the high-definition security footage recorded by the camera mounted behind the Avart's car wash at precisely 6:21 p.m. Investigators watched in complete, horrified silence as the silent lens clearly captured Carly Bruscia walking alone along the edge of the property, her body language entirely normal before she suddenly stopped, violently interrupted by an approaching figure. The footage indisputably showed a tall, heavily tattooed man wearing a distinct mechanic's uniform, deliberately stepping out from the shadows of the building and aggressively confronting the young girl in broad daylight. The camera meticulously documented the terrifying, undeniable moment of the abduction, capturing the man grabbing Carly firmly by the arm, completely overpowering her slight frame and forcefully leading her away against her, while as she visibly stiffened in fear. Recognizing the immense power and clarity of this digital evidence, law enforcement made the unprecedented, highly strategic decision to immediately release the chilling video to national television networks, broadcasting the killer's face directly into millions of living rooms. The sheer arrogance of the predator, who believed he could execute a brazen kidnapping in an open commercial lot without being seen, was instantaneously violently shattered by the overwhelming response of the American public. Within hours of the broadcast, a massive influx of tips flooded the police hotline, as multiple callers, including the suspect's own brother, definitively identified the tattooed man in the footage as 37-year-old Joseph Smith, a local mechanic with an extensive, violent criminal history. He had entirely failed to account for the overlapping fields of vision created by commercial security systems, leaving behind an irrefutable, time-stamped visual confession of His Highness' actions that completely bypassed the need for traditional eyewitness testimony. This monumental digital discovery provided law enforcement with the exact, unassailable proof required to secure high-risk arrest warrants, immediately transforming an anonymous predator into the most fiercely hunted fugitive in the state of Florida. Armed with the devastating clarity of the car wash surveillance video and the rapid public identification, heavily armed tactical units swiftly located and arrested Joseph Smith, forcefully ending his brief, violent evasion. Tragically, the overwhelming visual evidence could not reverse the horrific reality of his actions, and shortly after his apprehension, Smith provided information that led investigators to the heartbreaking discovery of Carly's body hidden near a local church. During the subsequent, highly publicized capital murder trial, the prosecution heavily utilized the inescapable security video as the absolute cornerstone of their case, methodically playing the footage to a deeply disturbed jury, completely destroying any potential defense strategy. The undeniable reality that Smith had brazenly abducted a child on camera entirely eliminated any shadow of a doubt regarding his guilt, leading the jury to swiftly convict him of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The judge handed down a definitive sentence of death, permanently removing the violent predator from society and ensuring he would face the ultimate consequence for a crime documented entirely by an unblinking lens. The profound tragedy of Carly's death fundamentally altered the national conversation regarding child safety, serving as a permanent, devastating reminder that suburban tranquility offers absolutely no guarantee of protection against determined predators. Smith's catastrophic underestimation of standard commercial security infrastructure stands as a permanent testament to the hubris of criminals who believe their physical strength makes them immune to digital observation. The sheer, inescapable reality is that cameras silently document the truth, exposing the darkest human actions to the unforgiving light of justice, no matter how arrogantly a killer operates. However, the phenomenon of a murderer brazenly ignoring a camera lens is not solely confined to automated surveillance systems, as an equally chilling tragedy would soon unfold internationally, where an assassin entirely failed to notice the handheld camera pointed directly at him by his very own victim. In the densely populated, vibrant barangay of Caloocan City, within the sprawling metropolis of Manila, the Philippines, the arrival of the new year is traditionally celebrated with an overwhelming, chaotic symphony of fireworks and community gatherings. Ronaldo Dagsa, a deeply respected local politician and barangay councilman, was a man deeply embedded in the fabric of this bustling neighborhood. Known for his firm stance against local crime and his unwavering dedication to his constituents. As the calendar transitioned to January 1, 2011, the 35-year-old public servant temporarily set aside his civic duties to focus entirely on his loving family, embracing the joyous atmosphere that permeated the vibrant streets outside their home. The Dagsa family had gathered in the alleyway, just outside their front door, to partake in the traditional midnight revelry, surrounded by the deafening noise of firecrackers and the thick, lingering smoke that characteristically blankets the city during these annual celebrations. Ronaldo, an enthusiastic amateur photographer who frequently documented his family's milestones, brought out his digital point and shoot camera to capture the fleeting moments of happiness amidst the holiday chaos. He positioned his smiling wife, his daughter, and his elderly mother-in-law against the backdrop of the family's parked vehicle, carefully framing the shot to immortalize their cheerful expressions as they welcomed the promising new year. The local community was completely engrossed in the festive pandemonium, creating an environment where the standard awareness of one's surroundings was naturally dampened by the overwhelming sensory input of the celebrations. There was absolutely no indication that this joyous family tradition, situated right on the threshold of their own home, was being actively monitored by a ruthless individual harboring lethal intentions. The politician believed he was completely safe within the heart of his own district, surrounded by the very people he had sworn to protect and serve through his political office. This comforting illusion of communal security was about to be violently and permanently ruptured, transforming a cherished family photograph into one of the most chilling, unprecedented pieces of forensic evidence in the history of international criminal investigations. The joyous atmosphere of the New Year's celebration instantaneously dissolved into a scene of unimaginable horror when the sharp, unmistakable crack of gunfire violently pierced through the ambient noise of the neighborhood's fireworks. Just as Ronaldo Dagsa pressed the shutter button on his digital camera to capture his family's smiling faces, multiple high-caliber bullets struck him directly in the chest and arm, physically throwing him backward onto the concrete pavement. The sheer suddenness of the attack left his wife and daughter completely paralyzed with shock, their joyful expressions rapidly morphing into screams of absolute terror as they watched the patriarch of their family collapse, bleeding at their feet. The immediate aftermath was characterized by total pandemonium, as the dense smoke from the firecrackers provided a perfect, chaotic cover for the assailant to seamlessly melt away into the panicked crowds fleeing the alleyway. Desperate family members and terrified neighbors frantically scrambled to provide emergency medical assistance to the fallen councilman, desperately attempting to stem the catastrophic blood loss while urgently summoning emergency services to the chaotic scene. Despite the rapid response of local paramedics and his immediate transportation to a nearby hospital, the massive trauma inflicted by the close-range gunshots proved completely fatal, and Reinaldo Dagsa was tragically pronounced dead upon arrival. The sudden, brazen assassination of a prominent public official right on his own doorstep sent immediate shockwaves of terror throughout Caloocan City, instantly transforming a night of celebration into a grim, high-stakes homicide investigation. Law enforcement officers rapidly descended upon the blood-stained alleyway, establishing a massive crime scene perimeter and desperately attempting to secure any physical evidence before it was compromised by the dense, milling crowds. The abrupt execution fundamentally shattered the neighborhood's sense of security, firmly establishing a profound point of no return, where a local political figure was violently silenced in the exact district he governed. The local police department immediately recognized the immense severity of the situation, launching a desperate, uphill battle to identify a phantom killer who had utilized the holiday chaos as the ultimate, impenetrable camouflage. As the initial shock of the assassination subsided, investigators from the local police precinct faced an incredibly daunting, seemingly insurmountable wall of silence when they began canvassing the densely populated neighborhood for eyewitness accounts. Despite the fact that the murder occurred on a crowded street in the middle of a massive public celebration, terrified residents adamantly refused to cooperate with the authorities, driven by a profound, paralyzing fear of violent retaliation. Detectives quickly uncovered that Reinaldo Dagsa's unwavering, aggressive political stance against localized gang activity and illegal drug syndicates had recently resulted in the arrests of several prominent criminal figures operating within his jurisdiction. This unyielding commitment to law and order had unfortunately generated a vast network of dangerous enemies, providing a multitude of potential motives, but absolutely no direct, actionable evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator. The investigative team spent agonizing days meticulously interviewing confidential informants and analyzing the councilman's recent political activities, desperately attempting to establish a tangible link between his civic duties and the brazen hit. Ballistics experts carefully extracted the fatal projectiles from the crime scene, confirming the weapon used was a standard .45 caliber handgun. But the lack of a registered database rendered this forensic detail completely useless without a suspect in custody. The sheer brazenness of the daylight assassination heavily indicated the involvement of a professional hitman or a deeply entrenched gang member who felt entirely confident in their ability to operate with absolute impunity in the crowded barangay. Law enforcement officers experienced mounting frustration as promising leads continuously evaporated into dead ends, heavily stymied by a community that was far too intimidated by the local criminal underworld to publicly testify. They were operating in an agonizing state of investigative paralysis, fully aware that a ruthless killer was walking freely among them, fully protected by the pervasive, suffocating atmosphere of fear that had engulfed the district. Authorities desperately needed an unassailable, objective breakthrough to pierce through the neighborhood's terrified silence, unaware that the victim himself had inadvertently secured the ultimate piece of incontrovertible evidence in his final moments of life. The absolute, chilling climax of this stagnant murder investigation materialized, not through the persistent efforts of hardened detectives, but through the deeply traumatized family attempting to salvage the final memories of their beloved patriarch. Days after the brutal assassination, Reinaldo Dagsa's grieving relatives finally mustered the emotional strength to power on the digital point and shoot camera that had fallen from his hands during the fatal attack, hoping to retrieve the last photographs he ever took. As they agonizingly scrolled through the digital gallery, they stopped abruptly on the very last image captured at the exact fraction of a second before the fatal shots were fired, exposing a reality that was simultaneously miraculous and utterly horrifying. The perfectly focused, high-resolution photograph prominently featured his smiling wife, daughter, and mother-in-law standing cheerfully in the foreground, brightly illuminated by the camera's sudden flash against the dark, smoky alleyway. However, positioned just behind the family's vehicle in the upper left quadrant of the frame, The unblinking lens had explicitly documented a young man wearing a baseball cap backward, stepping aggressively out from the shadows. The killer's face was completely visible, his eyes locked intensely on his target as he gripped a black .45 caliber pistol with both hands, aiming the barrel directly at the camera lens, and consequently, directly at Ronaldo Daggs's chest. Furthermore, the wide angle of the photograph inadvertently captured the face of a second male accomplice, standing slightly further back, acting as a lookout while the primary assassin executed the lethal strike. The sheer arrogance of the gunman, who completely ignored the victim pointing a digital device squarely in his direction, resulted in a perfectly time-stamped, undeniable visual confession frozen permanently in digital memory. The Dagsa family immediately rushed this monumental, unprecedented photographic evidence to the local police headquarters, instantaneously completely blowing the stalled investigation wide open and utterly destroying the perpetrator's illusion of anonymity. This single, extraordinary image completely circumvented the community's terrified silence, providing law enforcement with the exact, unassailable facial recognition required to immediately identify the local gang members responsible for the execution. Armed with the devastating, undeniable clarity of the victim's final photograph, the local police force immediately cross-referenced the killer's face with their criminal databases, swiftly identifying him as Arnold Buenaventura, a known gang member with a violent history. Heavily armed tactical units executed rapid, coordinated raids across the city, successfully apprehending Buenaventura alongside his two primary accomplices, completely neutralizing the immediate threat they posed to the terrified Baranga. Confronted with the inescapable, chilling reality that his exact moment of pulling the trigger was immortalized in high definition, Buenaventura's defense completely crumbled, providing prosecutors with a foolproof case that required zero reliance on intimidated civilian witnesses. The undeniable photographic evidence ensured a swift and decisive legal proceeding, resulting in the successful conviction and lengthy imprisonment of the men responsible for violently ending the councilman's life. The photograph itself rapidly circulated across international media outlets, becoming a profound, historic testament to a victim essentially reaching from beyond the grave to definitively identify his own murderer. Ronaldo Daggs's tragic death served as a permanent, devastating reminder of the immense dangers faced by dedicated public servants operating in areas heavily plagued by entrenched organized crime and gang violence. The sheer hubris of a killer who failed to recognize that his target was documenting his every move stands as a monumental, fatal miscalculation that permanently sealed his fate behind iron bars. This extraordinary case definitively proved that digital lenses can serve as the ultimate, uncompromising witnesses, perfectly capable of delivering exact justice even when the surrounding human community is paralyzed by fear. However, this profound underestimation of recording devices is not limited to chaotic, outdoor assassinations captured by handheld cameras, as an entirely different breed of killer would soon make an identical, catastrophic mistake. This deadly ignorance of surveillance infrastructure frequently infects the most intimate of crimes, seamlessly transporting us from a crowded Philippine alleyway to a quiet, seemingly perfect suburban home in Colorado, where a husband's dark secrets collided violently with a neighbor's unblinking security system. In the rapidly expanding, neatly ordered suburban community of Frederick, Colorado, the Watts family meticulously projected an image of absolute domestic perfection that was broadcast daily to thousands of followers online. Shannon Watts, a highly driven 34-year-old mother of two, utilized social media as both a personal diary and a professional platform, extensively documenting the seemingly flawless dynamics of her marriage to her husband Chris. Through the curated lens of her smartphone, the world was invited into a beautiful, spacious home filled with the joyous laughter of their two young daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. Chris was consistently portrayed in these digital archives as a deeply devoted, mild-mannered father and a loving, supportive partner. A man who effortlessly balanced his physically demanding job at a regional oil and gas company with the chaotic responsibilities of family life. As the summer of 2018 progressed, the family enthusiastically announced that Shannon was pregnant with their third child, a boy they intended to name Nico, further solidifying their public facade of a thriving, expanding household. The neighborhood they inhabited was characteristic of modern American suburbia, featuring quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and a strong sense of communal safety where property boundaries were visually monitored by standard residential security systems. To the casual observer scrolling through Shannon's vibrant, ceaseless stream of photographs and inspirational videos, the Watts family represented the absolute pinnacle of the American dream, completely devoid of any underlying friction or resentment. There was absolutely no visible indication that this heavily documented, picturesque existence was actively crumbling behind closed doors, poisoned by deep-seated financial distress and profound hidden betrayals. The stark, terrifying reality was that the loving husband prominently featured in hundreds of glowing online posts had quietly mentally detached from his family, secretly plotting an unimaginable exit strategy to entirely erase the life he had built. This devastating illusion of suburban bliss was about to be violently torn apart, exposing a terrifying truth that would captivate the entire nation and demonstrate the extreme, fatal disconnect between curated digital personas and grim reality. The carefully constructed facade of the Watts family permanently collapsed into a frantic, agonizing crisis on the morning of August 13, 2018, initiating a rapid chain of events that would completely dismantle Chris's fabricated reality. In the very early hours of that Monday, Shannon returned home from a brief, exhausting business trip to Arizona, dropped off at her front door at approximately 1:48 a.m. by her close friend and colleague, Nicole Atkinson. When the sun rose and the standard workday began, Shannon completely failed to respond to numerous text messages, missed a scheduled prenatal medical appointment, and uncharacteristically remained entirely silent on her usually active social media platforms. Recognizing this sudden, total lack of communication as profoundly alarming and entirely contrary to Shannon's highly organized nature, Nicole Atkinson became increasingly terrified for her friend's well-being and drove directly back to the Frederick residence that afternoon. Upon arriving at the seemingly quiet, undisturbed house, Nicole found the front door locked from the inside, Shannon's vehicle still parked securely in the garage, and absolutely no signs of activity from the pregnant mother or the two young girls. Driven by a deep, undeniable intuition that something catastrophic had occurred within the home, Nicole immediately contacted the Frederick Police Department, requesting an urgent welfare check while simultaneously demanding that Chris return from his oil work site. When a local police officer arrived at the property to investigate the distressing situation, Chris finally pulled into the driveway in his work truck, outwardly projecting an aura of calm confusion as he unlocked the front door to allow authorities inside. The immediate visual inspection of the interior raised massive, horrifying red flags as investigators quickly discovered Shannon's essential daily items, including her mobile phone, her purse, and crucial daily medications, carelessly left behind on the kitchen counter. This undeniable physical evidence explicitly contradicted Chris's initial, casual claim that his pregnant wife had simply packed up the children and gone to a friend's house following a difficult emotional conversation about a potential marital separation. This tense, deeply suspicious police intervention officially marked the definitive point of no return, locking Chris Watts into a hastily constructed narrative that would soon be subjected to intense, microscopic scrutiny by seasoned detectives. As the desperate, high-profile search for the missing mother and her daughters rapidly escalated, catching the immediate attention of regional and national news outlets, investigators began silently constructing a comprehensive behavioral and digital profile of the seemingly baffled husband. Chris willingly stood on his front porch and conducted multiple, highly scrutinized television interviews with local reporters, pleading directly to the camera for the safe return of his family, while noticeably failing to display any genuine emotional distress or shed a single tear. Seasoned detectives observing his rigid, strangely detached body language immediately recognized the classic, chilling hallmarks of deception. Noting that he frequently referred to his wife and children in the past tense, and seemed primarily focused on his own perceived victimhood. Behind the scenes, the investigative machinery kicked into high gear as law enforcement agents obtained sweeping search warrants for the couple's financial records, cellular data, and digital communications, desperately seeking any underlying motive for the sudden disappearance. The meticulous digital excavation rapidly uncovered a massive, explosive secret that Chris had desperately attempted to hide. He was deeply involved in a passionate, clandestine affair with a female coworker named Nicole Kessinger, a relationship he had falsely claimed was built on his impending divorce. Detectives meticulously mapped out his movements and communications, discovering that on the very weekend Shannon was away on business, Chris was actively researching remote vacation destinations with his mistress, clearly indicating his firm intention to begin a new life completely free of his familial obligations. Furthermore, his timeline of the early morning hours on August 13 was riddled with glaring inconsistencies, as he struggled to coherently explain exactly what transpired between the moment his wife returned home and the time he departed for his distant work site at the Survey 319 oil battery. The authorities recognized they were dealing with a highly dangerous, calculating individual who had likely committed an unspeakable domestic atrocity, but they desperately needed to anchor their rapidly mounting circumstantial evidence to an unassailable, objective fact. They required a definitive piece of visual proof to completely shatter the delicate web of lies he had spun for the media and the police, entirely unaware that the most damning piece of evidence was quietly resting just a few yards away from his front door. The absolute, inescapable climax of the investigation unfolded not inside a high-pressure interrogation room, but within the dimly lit living room of the Watts family's immediate neighbor, Nate Trinastich, whose private security system effectively sealed the killer's fate. Nate, a highly observant individual who immediately suspected Chris's involvement, proactively approached law enforcement to inform them that his sophisticated, high-definition driveway camera was pointed directly at the Watts property and had been recording continuously throughout the night. An investigating officer, accompanied by a visibly nervous Chris Watts, stepped into Nate's home to review the digital footage on a large television screen, initiating one of the most tense, chilling moments ever captured on a police body camera. The unblinking security lens meticulously documented the early morning darkness, explicitly showing Chris slowly backing his company work truck directly up to his garage doors at exactly 5:17 a.m., a highly unusual maneuver he had never previously executed. The agonizingly clear, time-stamped video definitively proved that Chris was the absolute only person to enter or leave the residence that entire morning, entirely destroying his fabricated narrative that Shannon had walked out of the house with the children after an emotional argument. Furthermore, the camera captured him making multiple, arduous trips back and forth between the garage and the bed of his truck, physically loading what investigators later tragically understood to be the lifeless bodies of his entire family before driving away to the oil site. As the undeniable digital truth played out on the screen, completely dismantling his entire alibi in real time, Chris's physical reaction profoundly betrayed his immense guilt. He paced frantically, placed his hands tightly over his head, and stared blankly at his phone in a state of absolute, terrified panic. He had meticulously planned what he believed to be the perfect annihilation of his family, but had completely, catastrophically failed to account for the overlapping field of vision created by his neighbor's standard suburban surveillance system. This monumental digital discovery provided law enforcement with the exact, unassailable proof required to immediately shift the missing persons inquiry into a quadruple homicide investigation, cornering a desperate predator with evidence that could never be cross-examined or denied. Faced with the devastating, irrefutable clarity of the neighbor's security footage and a completely failed polygraph examination, the crumbling facade of Chris Watts finally shattered, leading to a sprawling, horrific confession that shocked the globe. He eventually admitted to the brutal, calculated strangulation of his pregnant wife inside their bedroom, followed by the unimaginable smothering of his 2 young daughters at the remote, desolate oil battery site where he had driven them that morning. Investigators, guided by his grim admissions, successfully recovered Shannon in a shallow grave and tragically located the bodies of little Bella and Celeste submerged inside towering crude oil storage tanks, a deeply disturbing detail that scarred the law enforcement officers involved. To completely avoid the very real possibility of facing the death penalty, Chris officially pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with a deceased human body. The judge presiding over the highly emotional, globally broadcast sentencing hearing condemned his actions as the most inhumane and vicious crimes imaginable, subsequently handing down 5 consecutive life sentences without the absolute possibility of parole, ensuring he will die inside a maximum security prison. The profound tragedy of the Watts family stands as a permanent, harrowing testament to the unimaginable betrayals that can hide behind the curated perfection of social media, and the crucial, undeniable power of a simple neighborhood lens to expose a monster. Chris Watts' fatal, arrogant underestimation of the residential security infrastructure right next door serves as a stark reminder that modern surveillance silently watches even the most quiet suburban streets, ready to document the truth when human voices are violently silenced. However, the deadly hubris of ignoring surveillance cameras is not exclusively a suburban phenomenon, as the unblinking eyes of commercial security networks also tirelessly monitor isolated urban outposts. This inescapable technological vigilance brings us directly from a peaceful Colorado neighborhood to the freezing, dark landscape of Anchorage, Alaska, where a solitary night shift worker became the target of a meticulous, cross-country phantom whose greatest mistake was staring directly into an automated teller machine. The freezing, desolate expanse of Anchorage, Alaska, inherently demands a unique resilience from its residents, dictating a daily rhythm where geographic isolation is both a fundamental reality and a constant, underlying hazard. 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was a bright, remarkably independent young woman who possessed exactly that necessary resilience, working diligently to support herself and build a promising future in the rugged northern city. She was employed as a barista at Common Grounds Espresso, one of the many small, standalone roadside coffee kiosks that heavily dot the Alaskan landscape, catering to busy commuters seeking warmth and caffeine during the dark, unforgiving winter months. These solitary drive-through booths, often situated in poorly lit commercial parking lots or along desolate stretches of highway, inherently expose their single occupants to significant physical vulnerability, especially during the long, isolating evening shifts. Samantha was universally described by her fiercely loyal family and tight-knit circle of friends as a vibrant, deeply compassionate individual with a fiery spirit, someone who deeply loved animals and maintained a protective, loving energy toward her inner circle. On the bitterly cold evening of February 1, 2012, she was simply executing her standard closing routine, managing the tiny kiosk entirely by herself as the temperature rapidly plummeted and the city's vehicular traffic dwindled to a sparse, intermittent trickle. The brightly lit interior of the small wooden structure provided a fragile sanctuary of warmth against the freezing Alaskan night, a seemingly secure workspace that she had comfortably occupied countless times without ever experiencing any severe threat to her personal safety. Her father and her boyfriend fully expected her to complete her nightly accounting duties and return home exactly as she always did, entirely accustomed to the mundane, entirely uneventful nature of her evening employment. There was absolutely no outward indication that this tiny, illuminated box on the side of Tudor Road was currently being staked out by one of the most meticulously organized, terrifyingly disciplined serial killers in modern American history. This comforting illusion of routine safety was about to be violently shattered, plunging her family into a prolonged, agonizing nightmare that would eventually expose the existence of a highly mobile geographic phantom who hunted without any predictable pattern. The quiet, predictable routine of the Alaskan evening abruptly dissolved into a terrifying, high-stakes mystery when Samantha's boyfriend arrived at the Common Grounds kiosk shortly after her shift was scheduled to end, only to discover an incredibly alarming scene. The small wooden structure was entirely abandoned, The interior lights were still blazing, the commercial espresso machines were left unattended, and the cash register had been completely emptied of its evening earnings, instantaneously signaling that a violent robbery or abduction had taken place. Desperate, frantic phone calls to Samantha's mobile device went straight to an automated voicemail, completely severing her digital tether to the outside world and plunging her loved ones into an immediate state of absolute, icy dread. Recognizing the extreme, life-threatening danger of a young woman missing in sub-zero temperatures, the Anchorage Police Department was swiftly notified, triggering a massive, urgent law enforcement response that rapidly blanketed the surrounding commercial district in search of any physical clues. Initial reviews of the coffee kiosk's internal, relatively low-quality security camera provided a chilling but frustratingly vague confirmation of their worst fears, distinctly capturing a masked, heavily bundled male figure aggressively forcing Samantha out of the booth at gunpoint. However, the perpetrator was draped entirely in bulky winter gear, leaving absolutely no exposed skin or identifying physical features, effectively rendering the localized footage useless for immediate identification and proving he was fully aware of the immediate surveillance. The sudden, violent extraction of the young barista from her workplace left behind an agonizing void of physical evidence as the freezing, hardened Alaskan terrain stubbornly refused to yield any immediate forensic clues regarding the specific direction of their departure. This terrifying vanishing act marked the definitive point of no return, locking the Anchorage community into a desperate, frantic search operation while simultaneously launching a complex federal investigation into a kidnapping that defied all conventional local logic. The agonizing silence that immediately followed her violent abduction forced seasoned detectives to realize they were not dealing with a disorganized local criminal, but rather a methodical, highly intelligent predator who had seemingly vanished completely into the sprawling, unforgiving northern wilderness. As the days agonizingly stretched into weeks, without a single confirmed sighting or ransom communication, the massive investigative task force, heavily bolstered by specialized agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, desperately pursued every conceivable lead with mounting, suffocating frustration. The absolute, terrifying silence was finally, horrifically broken late in February when an unknown individual utilized Samantha's stolen mobile phone to send a cryptic text message to her desperate boyfriend, directing him to a local Anchorage park where a ransom note was hidden. The recovered package contained a meticulously typed demand for $30,000, explicitly demanding the funds be deposited directly into an account linked to Samantha's stolen debit card, accompanied by a deeply disturbing Polaroid photograph intended to serve as proof of life. The terrifying digital image depicted the young woman bound and holding a recent local newspaper, but highly trained forensic analysts quickly deduced the grim, horrifying reality that her eyes had been artificially propped open with clear thread. She was already deceased, her body frozen and meticulously staged by a completely remorseless killer. Despite the heartbreaking, devastating realization that they were heavily likely pursuing a murderer rather than a kidnapper, authorities strictly advised the grieving family to comply with the financial demands, strategically utilizing the stolen debit card as a crucial, nationwide electronic tracking beacon. The sudden influx of funds triggered an immediate geographical ping, completely shifting the focus of the intense investigation as the mysterious suspect began a brazen, cross-country journey, utilizing the victim's card at various automated teller machines thousands of miles away from Alaska. The digital footprint rapidly painted the terrifying picture of a highly mobile phantom, as withdrawal alerts triggered in Arizona, New Mexico, and eventually Texas, forcing federal agents to constantly scramble local jurisdictions in a desperate, frantic bid to physically intercept the user. Law enforcement realized they were aggressively hunting a highly disciplined, completely untethered predator who utilized cash, rented vehicles, and extensive travel to heavily obscure his identity, mistakenly believing that his constant movement essentially rendered him invisible to federal authorities. They desperately needed this meticulous killer to make a single, catastrophic mistake while interacting with the modern financial grid, entirely unaware that his ultimate downfall was currently being orchestrated by an unblinking, high-definition banking lens situated deep in the American South. The absolute, inescapable climax of this agonizing, nationwide federal manhunt finally materialized in the humid, sprawling landscape of Lufkin, Texas, completely dismantling the killer's heavily guarded illusion of total anonymity and geographical superiority. On March 13, 2012, the suspect pulled a rented white Ford Focus into the drive-through lane of a local commercial bank to execute yet another cash withdrawal utilizing Samantha Koenig's stolen debit card. Operating under the arrogant assumption that his cross-country distance provided absolute safety. However, in a momentary but highly catastrophic lapse of his normally rigorous, obsessive discipline, he pulled the vehicle slightly too far forward, forcing him to lean heavily out of the driver's side window to physically reach the machine's numerical keypad. In doing, he momentarily removed his disguise and completely exposed his bare face directly to the high-definition security camera, explicitly installed within the automated teller machine, to fiercely deter exactly the specific type of financial fraud. The unblinking commercial lens meticulously captured a crystal-clear, high-resolution image of his distinct facial features, fundamentally and permanently destroying the faceless phantom persona he had so carefully cultivated during his month-long evasion. Furthermore, the surrounding bank surveillance infrastructure cleanly recorded the make, model, and partial license plate of his rental vehicle, finally providing federal authorities with the exact, unassailable physical descriptors required to execute a highly targeted physical interception. This monumental digital discovery was instantly broadcast to law enforcement agencies across the entire state of Texas, transforming the vague tracking of electronic pings into a highly specific, high-speed physical manhunt along the vast interstate highway system. Just hours after the fatal ATM transaction, a vigilant Texas Highway Patrol officer spotted the identically matching white Ford Focus speeding along Interstate 10, immediately initiating a high-risk traffic stop that ultimately culminated in the arrest of 34-year-old Israel Keys. His monumental hubris led him to entirely believe he had constructed the perfect, untraceable crime, but he had completely failed to account for the overlapping, high-fidelity financial surveillance network that ultimately dragged him out of the shadows and directly into federal custody. Armed with the devastating, undeniable clarity of the Texas ATM security footage and the physical possession of the victim's debit card found directly inside his vehicle, federal investigators successfully transported Israel Keys back to Alaska to face the severe consequences of his actions. Under intense, prolonged interrogation, Keys slowly unveiled the unprecedented, horrifying depths of his cross-country murder methodology, coldly detailing how he meticulously buried hidden kill kits across the United States to explicitly facilitate random, untraceable homicides over the course of a decade. He eventually confessed to the brutal abduction, sexual assault, and murder of Samantha Koenig, providing the grim geographical coordinates that allowed authorities to finally recover her frozen remains from beneath the ice of Matanuska Lake, bringing a measure of agonizing closure to her devastated family. However, the pursuit of total legal justice was permanently circumvented in December 2012, when Keys, utilizing a razor blade intentionally hidden within his jail cell, successfully committed suicide while in federal custody, cowardly escaping a highly publicized trial and a potential federal death sentence. His deeply unsettling legacy firmly remains that of a highly organized, apex predator who believed his sheer geographical randomness made him completely invulnerable, only to be permanently undone by his careless, brief interaction with a standard commercial camera. Samantha's tragic fate stands as a permanent, harrowing testament to the unimaginable dangers faced by solitary night shift workers and the undeniable, crucial power of modern digital infrastructure to track down even the most sophisticated, highly evasive killers. This deadly, arrogant underestimation of urban recording devices is not an isolated phenomenon entirely confined to American soil, as an identical, catastrophic oversight would soon deeply scar a bustling, international thoroughfare. This inescapable technological vigilance seamlessly transports us from the frozen, desolate wilderness of Alaska to the vibrant, crowded streets of Melbourne, Australia, where a young woman's walk home fatally intersected with a ruthless predator whose darkest moment was perfectly captured by a bridal boutique's silent lens. In the vibrant, culturally diverse northern suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, the bustling corridor of Sydney Road in Brunswick serves as a lively epicenter for socialization, brimming with popular pubs, eclectic restaurants, and a heavy volume of pedestrian traffic. This energetic, deeply familiar urban environment was the adopted home of 29-year-old Jill Mader, an incredibly bright and charismatic Irish expatriate who had successfully relocated to Australia alongside her loving husband, Tom, 3 years prior. Jill was a highly respected and deeply valued employee at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, known universally among her colleagues, an extensive social circle for her sharp wit, her infectious laughter, and her profound generosity of spirit. She embraced the dynamic, cosmopolitan lifestyle that Melbourne offered, effortlessly navigating the city's public transport and walking its well-lit streets with the absolute confidence of a seasoned urban resident who felt fundamentally secure within her community. On the cool, relatively typical evening of Friday, September 21, 2012, Jill finished a demanding week at the television network and naturally gravitated toward a well-deserved night of relaxation and camaraderie with her ABC coworkers. The group initially convened at a local establishment for drinks before eventually migrating to Bar Etiquette, a popular venue situated directly on Sydney Road, where they spent several hours enjoying the standard, carefree banter of a Friday night shift wind down. Her husband, Tom, had remained at their nearby apartment, completely relaxed and fully expecting his wife to make the short, highly familiar walk home whenever the evening's festivities naturally concluded. The atmosphere was completely devoid of any underlying menace, characterized entirely by the joyous noise of the weekend crowd and the reassuring glow of streetlights illuminating the heavy pedestrian traffic. There was absolutely no outward indication, no subtle environmental warning sign, that this entirely routine social gathering would soon morph into a horrific tragedy that would permanently scar the nation's collective psyche. This comforting illusion of urban safety, fostered by the presence of hundreds of innocent bystanders and passing vehicles, was about to be irreversibly shattered, demonstrating that even the most populated thoroughfares can harbor unimaginable, predatory danger hidden just out of plain sight. She was entirely focused on the joyous present, completely oblivious to the dark intentions of a stranger who was already lurking in the periphery of her path. The carefree revelry of the Friday night outing abruptly dissolved into a chilling, agonizing void when Jill Mader bid farewell to her colleagues at approximately 1:30 a.m., setting off alone for what should have been a brief, 5-minute walk to her apartment. As the night slowly surrendered to the early hours of Saturday morning, Tom Mader awoke to the terrifying, undeniable realization that his wife had never returned to their shared home, and her side of the bed remained completely undisturbed. Frantic, desperately escalating attempts to reach her mobile phone went straight to an automated voicemail system. A total cessation of communication that was profoundly out of character for a young woman known for her strict reliability and constant connection to her loved ones. Driven by a deep, nauseating intuition that a catastrophic event had occurred in the short distance between the bar and their residence, Tom bypassed all standard waiting periods and immediately contacted the Victoria Police to officially report his wife as a missing person. Law enforcement officers instantly recognized the severe, highly alarming nature of the situation, immediately categorizing her sudden vanishing as deeply suspicious due to her stable professional life, her happy marriage, and the complete lack of any discernible motive for a voluntary disappearance. The immediate, terrifying vacuum left by her absence sparked one of the most massive, rapidly mobilizing public outcries in Australian history, as her desperate family and terrified friends instantly harnessed the immense, viral power of social media to spread awareness. Within mere hours, the streets of Brunswick were completely plastered with missing person flyers displaying Jill's vibrant, smiling face, while thousands of concerned citizens across the country shared digital appeals in a desperate, unified bid to generate any actionable leads. Local residents organized sprawling, impromptu search parties, meticulously scouring alleyways, public parks, and industrial dumpsters around the Sydney Road precinct. Armed with flashlights and a grim, mounting sense of dread regarding what they might uncover. This terrifying vanishing act from a heavily trafficked urban corridor officially marked the definitive point of no return, locking the Melbourne community into a desperate, high-stakes race against time that captivated the entire nation. The agonizing silence that immediately followed her departure from the bar forced seasoned detectives to realize they were confronting a highly elusive predator who had somehow managed to completely erase a young woman from a brightly lit, populated street without leaving a single, immediate physical trace. This complete absence of physical clues forced investigators to cast an incredibly wide net, hoping that someone, or something, had witnessed the exact moment of the abduction. Faced with a horrifying absence of physical evidence and the immense pressure of an intensely publicized, nationwide search, the Victoria Police launched a massive, heavily coordinated investigative operation to meticulously retrace Jill's final known movements along the bustling Brunswick corridor. Detectives systematically canvassed the entire length of Sydney Road, conducting hundreds of exhaustive interviews with local business owners, late-night pedestrians, and taxi drivers, desperately seeking any individual who might have witnessed the young Irish woman during her brief walk home. They meticulously cross-referenced these human testimonies with the complex, invisible digital web of cellular tower pings, utilizing the intermittent signals transmitted by Jill's mobile phone to construct a highly specific, geographic timeline of her trajectory before the device was violently deactivated. The investigative team faced an incredibly daunting, logistically overwhelming task as they legally requisitioned and began processing thousands of hours of scattered surveillance footage from every single commercial storefront, municipal traffic camera, and private residential security system located within a multi-block radius. A dedicated cadre of digital analysts spent agonizing, sleepless nights inside the police command center, painfully scanning the low-resolution, deeply shadowed video archives frame by tedious frame, searching for a brief glimpse of the distinct clothing Jill had been wearing that evening. The frustrating reality of urban surveillance rapidly became apparent, as numerous cameras provided disjointed, unhelpful angles, while others were tragically non-operational, forcing the detectives to rely on a terrifyingly fragile string of digital breadcrumbs to guide their desperate pursuit. They successfully managed to track her progress past a local bakery and a convenience store, confirming she was walking purposefully northward, entirely alone and completely unaware that she was being actively stalked by a ruthless, opportunistic predator hunting in the late-night shadows. However, the visual trail inexplicably went cold just mere blocks from her front door, plunging the investigative task force back into a state of agonizing, suffocating uncertainty as the desperate public demanded immediate answers and the media scrutiny reached an absolute fever pitch. Law enforcement realized they were aggressively hunting a dangerously bold individual who felt entirely comfortable executing a brazen abduction on a major public thoroughfare, necessitating an undeniable, objective visual breakthrough to completely shatter the terrifying mystery of her final moments. The detectives knew that human memory was inherently flawed and often unreliable in the chaotic environment of a late-night urban center. Therefore, the silent, unblinking perspective of a hidden camera became the absolute, singular hope for uncovering the horrifying truth of what transpired on that darkened sidewalk. The absolute, inescapable climax of this sprawling, high-stakes police investigation finally materialized when detectives meticulously analyzed the high-definition security footage recovered from a local bridal boutique named Hopita, situated directly along Jill's established walking route. As the exhausted investigators watched the silent, unblinking recording from the early hours of that Saturday morning, the suffocating tension within the command center reached a terrifying crescendo when the lens clearly captured the young woman walking into the frame at exactly 1:41 a.m. The footage indisputably documented Jill pausing briefly in the darkened alcove of the storefront, looking entirely normal and unthreatened, before the terrifying, undeniable figure of a man aggressively stepped into the camera's field of vision and deliberately intercepted her path. The high-resolution commercial lens meticulously recorded a chilling, brief interaction between the two, capturing the man speaking to Jill and gesturing forcefully, while her defensive body language clearly indicated profound discomfort and a desperate desire to simply continue her journey home. Tragically, the video documented Jill walking out of the camera's frame for the absolute last time, immediately followed by the predatory figure walking closely behind her, leaving behind an incontrovertible, time-stamped visual confession of the exact moment she was intercepted by her killer. Recognizing the monumental breaking power of this digital evidence, the Victoria Police made the highly strategic, calculated decision to immediately release a heavily cropped version of the CCTV footage to the Australian public, directly soliciting the nation's help to identify the man in the distinctive blue hoodie. The sheer arrogance of the predator, who completely believed he was operating invisibly in the late-night shadows of the city, was instantaneously violently shattered by the overwhelming, immediate response of the vigilant public and local informants. Within hours of the national broadcast, multiple callers definitively identified the man in the chilling footage as 41-year-old Adrian Ernest Bailey, a highly dangerous, violent serial sexual offender who was shockingly out on parole and living just a short distance from the crime scene. He had meticulously hunted for a vulnerable target that night but had catastrophically failed to account for the overlapping fields of vision created by commercial security systems, providing law enforcement with the exact, unassailable physical descriptors required to execute a high-risk, immediate arrest. The visual evidence was entirely irrefutable, presenting a clear, time-stamped sequence of events that bypassed any need for circumstantial assumptions or coerced confessions. The killer's profound arrogance led him to ignore the very technology that would ultimately strip away his anonymity and expose his monstrous nature to the entire world. Armed with the devastating, undeniable clarity of the bridal boutique security footage and his extensive, horrifying criminal history, heavily armed Victoria Police tactical units swiftly raided Adrian Bailey's residence and took the violent predator into immediate custody. Faced with the inescapable, time-stamped visual evidence that explicitly placed him interacting with the victim mere moments before her disappearance, Bailey's defense completely collapsed, leading him to confess to the brutal rape and murder of Jill Major. He provided the grim geographical coordinates that eventually allowed authorities to recover her tragically discarded remains from a shallow, desolate grave located nearly 50 kilometers away from the city, bringing a measure of agonizing, definitive closure to her devastated family. The undeniable security footage ensured a swift and highly secure legal proceeding, entirely circumventing the need for a prolonged trial and resulting in Bailey pleading guilty to the horrific charges, for which the judge handed down a definitive sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Jill's profound, senseless tragedy sent permanent, seismic shockwaves through the Australian justice system, prompting an estimated 30,000 heartbroken citizens to march down Sydney Road in a massive, unprecedented display of communal grief and a fierce demand for sweeping parole reforms. Bailey's catastrophic underestimation of the commercial security infrastructure lining the urban corridor stands as a permanent, chilling testament to the hubris of criminals who falsely believe their predatory experience renders them completely invisible to the unblinking gaze of digital lenses. The sheer, inescapable reality is that these cameras silently and objectively document the truth, exposing the darkest human actions to the unforgiving light of justice, permanently removing a monster from the streets who thought he had committed the perfect crime. This final devastating oversight clearly illustrates a profound, modern reality regarding the illusion of privacy and the inescapable nature of our digital surroundings, a theme that binds every single one of these deeply tragic stories together. As we reflect on the hubris of these 10 individuals who foolishly believed they could operate undetected, we must ultimately confront the profound implications of the vast, silent surveillance network that constantly monitors our modern world. Jill's vibrant memory continues to drive significant legal changes, ensuring that her devastating loss ultimately resulted in tangible protections for other vulnerable individuals. Her story stands as a permanent reminder that the lenses surrounding us are not just passive observers, but crucial instruments of ultimate justice that lead us directly to the undeniable truth. Ultimately, these tragedies shatter the illusion of the perfect crime, proving that the modern world is an inescapable digital panopticon where the silent, unblinking eyes of hidden lenses inevitably dismantle human hubris. As we confront this reality, we are left to ask ourselves if true privacy even exists anymore, or if we are all simply subjects waiting to be recorded. Thank you for watching.